34. Really had a wonderful time at the conference. It was a great conference. We really enjoyed ourselves there and the fellowship. There were several that were not able to make it this year because of health to themselves, or Brother Asbury's wife was not well, and several others. Brother Hancock is getting where he can't hardly get out and get about anymore. But still, it was a good conference and a good time of fellowship. This evening, then, as we come away from that conference, there are a number of things that themes that seem to prevail through the conference and the things that were said. And it's interesting how that none of the preachers, the topics aren't assigned, texts aren't assigned. Each preaches what they feel like the Lord has laid on their heart to preach. Brother Gordon says that next to the Lord settling him on who to have to preach is settling on the order in which to have them preach. He says sometimes that's a more difficult task. Because I think the Lord leads in all of that, and He gives to each the message. And the messages each year just seem to flow together. They support one another, and sometimes there are common themes. So we see the Lord leading in those things and what is preached and the speakers, and so it is a blessing. And so we want to remember those things, and over the next few weeks maybe it will influence some of the things I feel like the Lord would have me to preach and teach on. So remember that, keep that in mind, and keep us in your prayers. In Job chapter 34, we left off at verse 12. And we want to pick up with that. In verse 9, as he brings out and quotes Job, he said, "For he has said, it profiteth a man nothing that he should delight himself with God." Job felt, I believe, that he had delighted himself in the Lord. That is, he had made God the primary thing in his life. He sought to do that which was pleasing to God. And then all this has happened to him, and all those things have been taken away. Therefore, he questioned, what has it profited me? Remember then what Elihu said in verse 2, chapter 32 and verse 2, because this sets up for what we are going to study this evening. Job justified himself rather than God. So, Job was questioning, what has it profited me? Elihu is saying that Job justified himself rather than justifying God. In chapter 34 and verse 5, again it said, "For Job has said, I am righteous, and God hath taken away my judgment." Elihu addresses then Job's complaint. And we left off with verse 12, and we want to pick up with verse 12, where Elihu makes the statement, "Yea, surely God will not do wickedly, neither will the Almighty pervert judgment." See, Job had questioned God's judgment and how he dealt with him. And Elihu is nailing down this point for us. The Almighty is not going to pervert justice or judgment. He is going to do that which is right. So whatever, we need to just kind of settle in our minds. Whatever it is that God has done, it's right. And for a number of reasons, which Elihu kind of gets to here, said, God will not do wickedly. So when we pick up with verse 13, he said, who hath given him a charge over the earth? Or who hath disposed the whole world? If he set his heart upon man, if he gather unto himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh shall perish together, and man shall turn again unto dust. If now thou hast understanding, hear this, hearken to the voice of my words. Shall even he that hateth right govern, and wilt thou condemn him that is most just? Is it fit to say to a king, thou art wicked, and to princes, ye are ungodly? How much less to him that accepteth not the persons of princes, nor regardeth the rich more than the poor? For they all are the work of his hands. In a moment shall they die, the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away, and the mighty shall be taken away without hand. For his eyes are upon the ways of man, and he seeth all his goings. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. For he will not lay upon man more than right, that he should enter into judgment with God. Let us just stop there for a moment and begin to look back here over what he is saying. Now, surely God is going to do that which is right. And anything that God does, it is right. And one of the reasons for he points out here, said, who is higher than God? Basically, who is before God? Who is stronger than God? Who made God in charge of the earth? Basically what it says. Who put you in charge here? Sometimes we ask somebody that there's a group of people and somebody kind of takes the lead and is bossing people around, and people look at him and say, well, wait a minute, who made you the boss here? And Elihu is saying, who made God the boss? Because there isn't anybody greater than God. Nobody appointed him this. He assumes it because who he is. He created everything. It all belongs to him. And since he created it, it belongs to him. Does he not have the right to do with it as he pleases? Is it that which he does? Is it not right? Because there's none to tell him that what he's doing is wrong. Shall the thing formed say to him that made it, why hast thou made me thus? And it's not just a matter of that he has the power to do it, but his very nature. He's not just arbitrarily the boss, but his very nature is such that he can do no sin. He cannot do that which is wrong, that which is evil. And we need to understand that's included in this idea. Who hath given him a charge over the earth? Or who hath disposed of the whole thing? No, if he set his heart upon man, if he chooses, he's the creator of the earth and all things in it, which includes man. Now he points out some things here. The end of man is death, to return to the dust from which he was made, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, and the fall and the curse that was placed upon man because of sin. Sin entered the world by man, by one man, by Adam. And therefore death is passed upon all men, because all have sinned. Not just the fact that Adam was our representative head, and in him we all fell because he fell, but also because of the fact that we have all sinned. In that there is passed down from Adam to all his offspring that Adamic nature, or that fallen nature. We call it the Adamic nature because it began with him. It began with him in the fall. And so we refer to it as the Adamic nature, the sin nature that is in man. And because of that, we have sinned. And so death not only was passed upon Adam, it was not just passed upon mankind arbitrarily because of Adam's fall, but it's passed upon each of us because each of us has sinned. And so if he set his heart upon man, if he gather unto himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh shall perish together. And man shall turn again unto the dust. He said, from dust wast thou taken, and to dust shalt thou return. And we do see that in the world around us. We see that fulfilled, that when things die, and not just man, so all living things, when they die, they decay and return to the earth. You know, trees, when they die, they rot and return to the earth. Grass and things like that, it dies, it decays and returns to the earth. Every living thing. And so, this is fulfilled. And again, I think Elihu, for Job and his three friends, and others may be present that have been witness to this as he has been, for their benefit, for our learning, for our admonition, to put what has happened here in this relatively short period of time. And again, great stress, great loss distorts our sense of time. What had happened over a very short period of time compared to Job's life prior to that. It's just when we're in the midst of things like that, that becomes our whole life, it seems like. Job lamented, man that is born of woman is few of days and full of trouble. But God had blessed him all the time, right up until this time. What's he talking about? Few of days and full of trouble. That little pocket of time was distorting his perspective over his whole life. And that's what happens to us. And Elihu is helping us to refocus, to step back and put things back into perspective. We live, we die, but God's in charge of everything. We need to put this in perspective to God. And so he says here in verse 16, if now thou hast understanding, hear this, hearken to the voice of my words. He's pointed out these things here. That God is not going to pervert judgment. God can do no wrong. He is the creator. All things are made by nobody appointed him and put him in charge because he is in charge from the beginning. There's none greater, there's none more powerful. He has control over all things. All things belong to him. And if he sets his heart upon man and says, this is what I'm going to do, he's going to do it. If he wanted to call into himself, He says, gather to himself his spirit and his breath of man, said everybody would just die all at once. That was his choice and his desire. But he hasn't done that. And he said, now if you understand this, if you kind of get your mind around that, he said, then listen to what I'm going to say. And he goes on. Shall even he that hateth right govern, and wilt thou condemn him that is most just? Now, at first, I was thinking he was talking to Job's three friends who thought they were in positions to govern or to bind. And they had condemned Job, who was a just man. But this is looking beyond that even higher, that Job himself, he's saying, because as he applies this, he's applying this to God. Shall even he that hateth right, that has a negative preference toward that which is right. If that's like saying, somebody that is kind of an anarchist that doesn't believe in government, do you make them a ruler? You put them in charge? Is that who's going to govern? Wilt thou? And so he's saying, look, are you in a position to say to God and to condemn him, he who is the most just? Instead of all of us, go back up there, verse 12. Yea, surely God will not do wickedly, neither shall the Almighty pervert judgment. Will you condemn him who is the most just? Verse 18, is it fit to say, he's saying, just consider, is it appropriate for you to say to the king, man, you're wicked? It's not very smart. Now, John the Baptist did. Stood before King Herod, said, you've sinned. It's not right for you to have your brother's wife. And what happened? He was thrown in jail, and eventually he was beheaded. Not because John did something wrong, but that's what happens when you stand before a king and tell them that they're wrong. And so he's saying, just think about this, humanly speaking, for a minute. That even you understand it's inappropriate to say to the king, thou art wicked, and to princes, ye are ungodly. That is not the wisest thing to do, because they have power over you. They have the power of life and death over you. How much less is it appropriate? And see, that's his point. He said, if it's not appropriate for you to say to the king, you're wicked. To say to princes, and princes are of a lesser rank than a king, but they're people that rule, that govern. Someone who's in charge, who has power and authority. You're ungodly. Why? Because they have the power of life and death over you. They're in a position to judge you. And if it's inappropriate to say it to men, said, how much less appropriate is it to say to God that does not accept people's persons? Said, how much less to him that accepteth not the persons of princes? The princes and the kings of the earth are beneath him. He has the power over all. And if you would not say this to the king, if you would not say this to the prince, if you would hold your tongue, why would you then turn around and condemn God and accuse Him of injustice, of perverting judgment, when He's higher than the king, when He's higher than the princes? He accepteth not the persons of princes, nor regardeth the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of His hands. There's a great lesson in that verse right there. It digresses a little bit from our thoughts this evening, but we're all the work of His hands. Psalm 100 says we're His people, the sheep of His pasture. Psalm 119:73, verse 73. Said, Thy hands have made me and fashioned me. Give me understanding that I may learn Thy commandments. And really, that verse fits to what Elihu is saying here to Job. Thy hands have made me and fashioned me. Give me understanding that I may learn Thy commandments. You know, you made me. You have fashioned me. I'm the work of your hands. Teach me what is right. Teach me your commandments. Said in a moment, and he talks about he doesn't regard princes, he doesn't regard the persons, he does not regard the rich more than the poor. They are all equally the work of His hands. All men are the work of His hands, and He does not regard their person. He's greater than all. He created all of them. Said, in a moment shall they die, and the people shall be troubled at midnight and pass away, and the mighty shall be taken away without hand. I said, they're all going to pass away. Rich, poor, mighty, weak, makes no difference. That His eyes are upon the ways of man. He seeth all his goings. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. For He will not lay upon man more than right, that he should enter into judgment with God. So he said, not only has He made all men, but He knows, He understands everyone. He sees all their ways, all their doings. There is nothing hid from His sight. The workers of iniquity cannot hide themselves. There is no darkness where man can hide that which he does from God's sight. He sees our hearts. He sees into the dark recesses of our hearts and minds. He knows what we're thinking, much less what we do. Nothing can be hid from Him. He sees and knows and understands us better than we know ourselves. The Bible says, the heart is deceitful above all things, and it's desperately wicked. Who can know it? God knows it. See, our hearts may deceive ourselves. We many times are not honest with ourselves, do not completely understand our own motives and why we do things. The heart is deceitful. But God is able, He's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And He reveals these things to us. Many times, that's why we can think we're okay, we're going along okay, and everything's fine. And through the preaching of God's Word, God can open up our understanding to see ourselves in a way that we didn't see before, to see where, my thinking was wrong. My motives were wrong. I was wrong. How did we come to see that? Because God revealed it to us. We were deceived. Our own hearts deceived us. But God, who knows the heart, is able to reveal it to us. And he says in verse 20, for he will not lay upon man more than right. He's saying, Job, let's get back to our thought here. Job, whatever God has laid upon you, it is right. End of story. In other words, Job, what were you complaining about? And Job himself, in the beginning, made the statements. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He can bless me and give to me. He can take it away. It is His right. And He's not going to do anything to me that isn't right. So, now I'm reminded there in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, where he says, there's no temptation taken you but such as is common to man, and the Lord will not lay any more on us than what we're able to bear. He's not going to do anything that isn't right. And He knows our strengths. He knows our weaknesses. He will deal with each of us righteously. But as we go on here, and He's just laying this out, how God deals with men in general. He will break in pieces mighty men without number and set others in their stead. And if He does so, He's right. Therefore He knoweth their works, and He overturneth them in the night, so that they are destroyed. He striketh them as wicked men in the open sight of others, before witnesses. He does this openly. Because they turned back from Him and would not consider any of His ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come unto Him, and He heareth the cry of the afflicted. Notice, there are people that know better, but they choose to depart or turn away from that which God has said, that which is right. And He's especially angry with them. And when He judges righteously. He said, He striketh them as wicked men in the open sight of others, before witnesses. And I was thinking about that, where in the Scriptures, in the New Testament, John, in the writings of John, 2 in the Gospel of John, and 1 in the first epistle of John, in John 6, verse 66, He was teaching some things that were kind of hard. And it says that from that time on, some of His disciples walked no more with Him. And then in John 8:31 is when He made the statement, if you continue in my word, then you're my disciples indeed. He said, after some, this is too hard, we can't take this. And they turned back and they walked with Him no more. They didn't follow Him anymore. He said, if you continue in my word, then you're my disciples indeed. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 19, where it says, they went out from us because they were not of us. For had they been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us. If you continue in my word, then you're my disciple indeed. He said, but they went out that they might be made manifest. And now here's the point I believe that Elihu is making to Job. God tests us. He brings this application home He said to Job, when he giveth quietness, who can make trouble? Saying, Job, if anyone made trouble for you, God let them. You know, Job said, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. He also said to his wife, shall we receive good at the hand of the Lord, not evil also? He said, when he hideth his face, that is, does not allow access, who can behold him? Job, you could not gain an audience with God because God chose not to grant you access to him at that time. He is sovereign and can do that. He owes no man anything. We don't say it, but sometimes we believe it or we act like it, that God owes us something. Verse 30, he says here, well, he said, because they turn not back from him, would not consider any ways. He striketh them as the wicked men in the open sight of others. They might be made manifest. Notice, he said, when he gives, verse 29, when he giveth quietness, who then can make trouble? When he hideth his face, who then can behold him, whether it be done against a nation or against a man only? So he said, God deals the same way with nations, and someday he deals the same way with an individual person. And what does he does? He said, that the hypocrite reign not, lest the people be ensnared. Sometimes God lays these judgments upon men. He withdraws his protection. He allows these things to happen. And then he withdraws them and is silent for a time, as he was with Job. Job felt like, Lord, where are you? I've sought your face. I've sought an audience with you. It's like you're not listening to me. First John said that they might be made manifest. There's a difference between false professors and true believers. And God wants to manifest that difference in front of witnesses. That the hypocrite, that the false professor might be made manifest and brought out into the open where people can see the falseness and therefore not be entangled or deceived by their teaching. When God allows such things to happen, the true believer will persevere in their faith. And that's the reason Elihu was rebuking Job. And he said, look, I want to see you justified. My desire, Job, is that your trials and things be concluded as quickly as possible, so that you can move on to the blessings. So, but you've got to learn a lesson here. You're disappointed that you've justified yourself rather than God. And so he goes on then to point out how the believers react. He says in verse 31, surely it is meet to be said, that is, it is what is appropriate and consistent for one who bears this kind of judgment, to say unto God, instead of saying unto God, what profit has there been in serving you? Instead of saying things like that, what is appropriate is to say, I have borne chastisement, I will not offend anymore. See, we're to bear the chastisement of the Lord. And trials and things, I think, come under this heading. And saying, well, Job hadn't sinned. Well, he did not sin with his lips, But one of the things that was pointed out was that through all this, he never turned to God and asked in prayer. He just sat there silently, brooding over his losses, and then he complained. But he did not give God the glory for it. He said, surely it is meet to be said unto God, I have borne chastisement, I will not offend any more. That which I see not, teach thou me. He said, if I don't understand, teach me. In other words, God, I'm at your disposal. That which you're doing is right. If I don't understand, show me. That which I see not, teach thou me. If I have done iniquity, I will do no more. Should it be according to thy mind? He will, in other words, should God do according as you think? He will recompense it whether thou refuse or whether thou choose, and not I. Therefore speak what thou knowest. Let men of understanding tell me, and let a wise man hearken unto me. Job has spoken without knowledge, and his words were without wisdom. And in particular, what he quoted Job as saying, that I am righteous, and God has taken away my judgment. Profit man nothing, that he should delight himself with God. And that's what he's saying. Job has spoken without knowledge, and his words were without wisdom. Not everything that Job said was without wisdom. But in that context here, the things he said, my desire is that Job may be tried unto the end because of his answers for wicked men. He addeth rebellion unto his sin. So he's saying, Job, you sinned. You added rebellion unto this. He clappeth his hands among us and multiplieth his words against God. Is that he failed to give God the glory. He justified himself rather than God. He kept insisting on his righteousness rather than humbly accepting these things and seeking God's favor here. And so let us learn not to be stubborn. And I think as we look at this and we try to think of the things that Job did, when his friends began to condemn him, Job reacted to that. Rather than as he had, when these things happened, he worshiped God, and he said, naked came I into this from my mother's womb, naked will I leave. The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord. When his wife came to him, and she said, just curse God and die. Get it over with. If you curse him, he'll kill you, he'll take you out of this, he'll put you out of your misery. And he said, you talk like us one of the silly women. Shall we receive good at the hands of the Lord and not evil also? So in these things, he remained in the right perspective. But when his friends began to attack him personally, because his wife didn't attack him. I believe that somebody pointed out she loved him so much, and she could not stand to see him suffering. And so, from her perspective, it had been merciful for God to go ahead and just take his life. And she said, just curse God and die. But his friends attacked him personally. They attacked his integrity. And that's when he began to react. And rather than continuing to glorify God, give God the glory, he began to justify himself. He lost perspective. And he got embroiled in this battle of words with his three friends. You know, that happens so many times. And what is it that the Bible warns us? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I think Job lost sight of that, and he began to make his fight with his friends over a side issue, rather than to continue to give glory to the Lord. Help us may God help us not to lose sight of the fact that we belong to God and we're to glorify God. Everything we say, everything we do, whether God's blessing us, give God the glory for it, and in times of trials and persecutions and difficulties and loss and things in our lives, we need to glorify Him then as well. And give Him the glory through it. God has a purpose in it. All that He does is right, and we need to acknowledge that in front of witnesses, give God the glory for it. And Elihu, we will pick up there with chapter 35 then, as Elihu takes up another train of thought and quotes of Job, and he begins to answer that as well. Let us